Donald Trump continues to believe that there's some sort of mainstream media conspiracy against him, and he alleges that one thing the media does is avoid taking shots of the massive crowds of people that show up to his rallies. Now, as a result, he named one particular reporter, which is a dangerous thing to do in this election cycle, considering some of the death threats and acts of violence that have been hurled against those who speak out against Trump. Take a look at what he said at a recent rally.
It's too bad those cameras aren't turning around to see this incredible group of people with thousands more outside. Isn't it too bad? They don't do it. But you know, if Hillary speaks and there's 30 people in a line, they say, oh, the crowd is massive. We have massive crowds. There's something happening. They're not reporting it. Katie, you're not reporting it, Katie. But there's something happening, Katie. There's something happening, Katie.
Okay, so he was referring to Katy Tur, who is a reporter with NBC. She has dealt with some Trump supporters attacking her, not physically, but, you know, threatening her and stuff like that. And so she responded to the accusations that she's doing biased coverage of his rallies. See what she has to say.
Let me tell you, it's been a wild ride for about a year and a half, and it is a unique experience to have an entire crowd of people, whether it is a open-air venue like we were today or a stadium with 10,000+ people booing you. And it's especially unique when they're actually saying your name and looking directly at you. And that's what happened today. That being said, Donald Trump was complaining about this idea that he has that the press doesn't show his crowds, which is just factually untrue. The cameras that are there, there's a number of cameras. He sees them all. Oftentimes when he's playing to the camera and saying we don't move our cameras to show these crowds, the cameras are all looking in opposite directions, showing the crowds. And not to mention, we are penned in. The campaign doesn't allow the cameras to even leave to go get more crowd pictures. Donald Trump also does know this to be incorrect. He's joked in private with reporters about how he understands how the pool camera works. This is a shtick that he does. It's to rile up his base. It's to give them an excuse for polls that might not be in his favor. It's to give them an excuse to berate somebody other than Donald Trump and to blame somebody for something that doesn't look as good as they want it to look.
So part of the reason that Donald Trump does it is that it's a savvy move. I'm going to give him credit here, because not about naming the specific journalist, that's a different part of it, but complaining about how they don't show the crowds. Because you know how the media is. If the right wing complains about something, they're like, that's not true. That's not true. Here, let's show you his crowds. Nonstop show you his crowds. Mission accomplished. That's what he wanted you to do. You had already done it. You had shown his empty podium nonstop. Bernie Sanders would be speaking in the middle of a primary on a night that he won, right? Amazing victory. And CNN would just show Donald Trump's empty podium.
Yes.
They have given him literally billions of dollars in free media. So the idea that they were unfair to him in not covering him enough is preposterous. Now, if he says, look, you're unfair in how you cover me, I don't think that's true, but I understand that they show his downsides, which are factual. But when he says you don't cover me enough or you don't show my crowds, he doesn't have any leg to stand on. It's just a trick.
All they've done is cover him nonstop, to the point where they legitimized him as someone worth being in the running for president of the United States. Okay, the mainstream media covering him too much has been part of the problem. But what I also find really interesting is I think he's setting the stage to make it seem as though the election was stolen from him. So a lot of Americans are not smart. And what I mean by that is they don't know the difference between actual polling that has sound methodology and anecdotal evidence, right? So his rallies are anecdotal evidence. Just because you have a bunch of people showing up at your rallies doesn't mean that you are, polling much higher than Hillary Clinton and there's no way that she could really justifiably win. No, it's anecdotal evidence. It doesn't mean anything. And that's the thing, Americans will fall for it. And so again, I think he's setting the stage. So if he doesn't win, he'll contest, the fact that he didn't. And I don't know what that's going to lead to. And honestly, I'm afraid. When Hillary was polling much higher than him, and of course that the poll numbers have tightened quite a bit, you know, he threw out the whole thing about the election being rigged. That is dangerous, dangerous stuff to be putting in people's heads. That will lead to people carrying out acts of violence, especially these Trump supporters, many of which I believe are unhinged and, yes, are deplorable. So I don't know. I'm worried about how this is all going to turn out. And when it comes to the issue of naming Katy Tur, what are you doing? What are you doing?
I know what he's doing. So first, on the attacking the media, it's not just the rigged stuff that you mentioned. He's mentioning that less now that the polls have tightened.
Right.
Because if he wins, he doesn't want to have any talk about how it was rigged.
Right.
Right. But part of his plan of attack here, when he attacks the media, is now remember they're biased, so ignore whatever they report about me. So if they're reporting that I grab women, I sexually harass women, I sexually assaulted women, ignore them, because remember the media is biased against me. It's a smart tactic, and it's working. I know. We go and ask his supporters. They're like, we don't believe anything the media says. We just don't believe it.
They're sensationalizing the accusations of sexual assault and rape.
That's what they keep saying.
That's what the media is doing.
So that is, to be fair to Donald Trump, the second savvy political part of this. Now, the third part is about Katy Tur, specifically pointing her out. That is not savvy. It turns a lot of the press against them, and they want to protect her, which makes sense, right? And Kelly Conway, who's his main campaign spokesperson, knows that, and she's going around going, no, we didn't mean to label her, and we're going to have a clip of hers in a second for you guys. But the reason he did it is because he can't help himself. He's attracted to her. That's what he does.
I got that sense too.
You know what it felt like? Because he talks like a third grader. It felt like a third grader who's attracted to his classmates, so he teases her.
Yep.
Oh, Katie. And now, look, under normal circumstances, let's keep it real. This would be great publicity for whoever got attacked in the press. Everybody's talking about Katy Tur. But these are not normal circumstances, and it is not a positive thing. The first time he attacked her, it was back in December. Mm-hmm. She had to be escorted out of the building by the Secret Service. These are dangerous times, okay? And now we know Donald Trump's history of aggression, both towards the press and women. Mm-hmm. And, when he's singling you out like that, and we know his crowd and how they attack people, those are not normal times. So that is really disconcerting. Finally, he said in a clip that we didn't show you, he referred to her as Little Katy, third-rate journalist. He's such a creep. That is, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course.
That phrase, Little Katy, okay, third-grade journalist, is so demeaning. He's such a piece of crap bully. And like all bullies, he's thin-skinned. His ego is a mask for his insecurity. And then when you have someone that insecure, dangerous times.
Yeah. Donald Trump has not achieved anything in his life on his own. Donald Trump is the definition of a little bitch, right? So if you're I don't know enough about Katy Tur to judge her journalism, to be completely honest with you guys, but I would venture to guess that she worked really hard to get to where she is in her life. Donald Trump inherited money, which he then lost huge chunks of because of his failed businesses. So he's a third-rate person. Okay, so let's just get that out of the way. Yeah. Finally,
and right again, projection. Little Donnie.
Yeah.
And little Donnie could never make his daddy happy because his daddy knew what an idiot knucklehead son he had. So it's nonstop projection.
Haven't we already gone through this with a president who really wanted to impress his father and did really stupid things in the process?
And
so, just putting that out there.
Set the world on fire. Yeah, let's try that again.
All right, so finally, his campaign spokesperson, Kellyanne Conway, refusing to answer the question as to whether or not what Trump said was wrong. Take a look.
Do you think it's appropriate for Donald Trump in a public setting like that to single out reporters, and not just an NBC reporter, any reporter by name, given the heat reporters have been taking in this, given the fact that Katy has had to be escorted out by Secret Service at previous rallies? Why is he calling people out by name in the back of the room?
Well, he obviously didn't mean it in any malicious way. You heard what he said, but I've spoken to NBC News about that issue, and I'll leave it there.
Would you like to shed any light on it?
No. Sorry.
Wow.
Call me later.
Why can't we talk about it on TV?
But I will tell you just generally about the media. People are so tired of being told what to think, how to act, what to do.
Wait, how does that
who to
connect
vote
with
for.
Katy Tur, though?
It connects with the media generally. That is one of his biggest
I have
affirmative
never
talking
seen in
points,
her
which is-
reporting her telling anyone how to think.
No,
Ever,
no.
once.
This is not about Katy. I'm extrapolating onto one of his major, compelling, and successful messaging points.
Do you
All right,
agree
Willie's
Donald
gonna
Trump was
call you
wrong to
later.
call Katy out?
I always prefer when he talks about institutions generally, and I had an exchange with Katy last night, and I've been in touch with NBC News.
In other words, behind the scenes, just like Katy Tur said in her reporting, come on, you know we don't mean it. These are all games. Now remember, you're going to want access to us. We're now nearly tied in the polls. What if we win? You're going to want access. You want access to me. You want access to Trump. And if he wins, you're really going to want access. It'll cause a big brouhaha here, okay? We didn't mean it. Let's just move on.
The media's obsession with access is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know if they know this. You can do a pretty good show without having access to pieces of shit like Donald Trump.
Yeah, boy, this show has been so hurt by not having Kellyanne fucking Conway on to spout her fucking bullshit. Boy, that would really elucidate the matters at hand. We're really missing out. We need independent media to make sure that we hold corporate media accountable. The people that can make that happen is you. You make the Young Turks possible. tytnetwork.com/join. Join us. Be the revolution.